First of all, I love Ramp. I'm a user of Ramp, but
Yeah.
I need the logo on both sides of the mug. How am I supposed to like
How? Yeah.
flex swag if no one knows that this is a branded mug that I'm
Yeah.
drinking out of? It's
They're
crazy.
expecting me to drink left-handed.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine I just dump coffee over myself? I'm not that coordinated with my left hand.
Get it together, Rant.
Come on. That's what this LinkedIn Live is about. It's me
Yeah.
criticizing people's swag.
Corporate swag. Okay. So, Zoe, I'm super excited to have you here. When I thought about different content, different topics that I could bring into a live discussion, the topic of community is obviously big. There's a ton of people I could reach out to talk to. I don't know if you know this because it was such a small passing moment in time. It was Thursday night sales, the day we all left, and you were like, hey, come grab coffee, come talk. And it was this like level of engagement that you had that like I've never like I don't know quite what the word is for it, but I was like, yeah, there's something about this person that like stands out. And then you went to Spec It, took over community, and it like blew up. And so like when I think community, I think your name. So kudos.
That means so much. I remember that conversation. I loved it. I think it's fun when you get to not only like talk shop, but talk life and talk like visions and dreams with people. Like it's cool to, get in the weeds and like nerd out about SaaS, but it's also really fun to hear somebody's personal story and like why it matters to them. And I think that was like something that had me really engaged with like what you were telling me about where Lavender was at that point and some of the things we were chatting about, like community ideas and whatever else we talked about.
Yeah, it was after a late night, so I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what we talked about. I just remember
You're like, did we even talk about those things? Are we even talking about the same thing right now?
I think we did. I think we did. That said, it brings up like an interesting first question to me because I think a lot of companies have this idea of community, like, and they think like, I think there's like weird misperceptions of like personal branding equals community, and then there's like perceptions of like you need like to create a Slack channel. Yeah, I don't think those things are necessarily quote community, but I'm curious, like, what are the most like common misconceptions you have or you see when it comes to the community world?
Yeah, I think there's a couple. The one that comes to mind the most is that bigger is better. I actually fundamentally disagree with the fact that bigger community is better because as communities scale, and I
Mhm.
think most people could observe any very, very large community and see that the engagement decreases and the quality of engagement decreases as communities get really, really big and not just big, but like too broad. I think
Yeah.
that's really the problem. It's not necessarily like size and scale, it's like breadth versus depth. And I think that's the things people are like, well, if I have a 10,000 person community, that's of value to me. It's like, well, I'd rather have something like Thursday night sales where 200 people ride or die show up every Thursday and actually like contribute to the conversation and keep things moving and are building relationships and helping one another. That's more meaningful to me than 20,000 person Slack with its crickets and just the community manager posting something once a day. Like
Yeah.
that's not what community is. I think I said this on a podcast not that long ago, but community at its best is like a well we can draw from when we are kind of like running dry and something we can pour into when we have more to give. And I think there's like the misconception that like that has to be an ocean. It doesn't. It could be, a cup, but like it's what you need and when you need it. And I think that's like community at its best.
That's neat. I hadn't thought about it that way. I've always like whenever I think about it, and I think about like how do you separate the personal branding aspect from the community aspect.
Mm.
It's like Thursday night sales is a good example, right? Like you could look at it as like Scott and Amy and they have an audience,
Mhm.
But here we are conversing about it. And so it's actually a many to many type thing, right? Like Scott or Amy or Scott and Amy could take a week off and everybody would still show up, right? That's the definition of a community in my mind. It's not like I have an audience of people on LinkedIn, but I don't think I've built a quote community by any stretch.
Totally. I mean, I think it's the difference of like, you know, being talked at to, yeah, like having an actual conversation. Like, can you facilitate real conversations between people? I think one of the best things that I'm seeing in the customer community world is customer to customer education. So, like,
Mhm.
can you create a space where customers are sharing best practices with one another and nerding out about your product? Like, one thing that I think Lavender does really, really well is you guys have a pretty cool user generated content flywheel where your customers get on LinkedIn and they're like, I got 100%, which I've never scored 100 on a Lavender email. It doesn't matter what I do. I've like the highest I think I've ever done is like a 98 and it drives me insane. Like I will forever be upset about that. But that's so cool that people go on and then they like share best practices and they're like, oh, you should try and like switch up your subject line. It's like you have a personal brand of being very, very helpful and giving
Mhm.
email advice. And I think that bleeds into the culture of the community within your customers that you are building, that then encourages them to share those best practices with one another. Now, if you just gave them a platform to come together and like share that feedback more regularly, you would have a community baked in to Lavender like today.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I get like DMs asking about that. It's like, hey, do you have a community that I could tap into? Because that'd be really interesting. Um, let's come back to that because I think there's a missing piece, which is
Mhm.
community is a fairly new concept when it comes to software in particular.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like your path to get here. What was it? Like you were a bomb SDRing, and you went from that to now, there's dually in between Spec it. Yeah. How did that like chart out? How did you find that path?
So it was like equal parts, grace and choice, right? Like there's that saying that like luck is where opportunity meets preparation or something like that.
Yeah.
And I think for me, I was really successful as an SDR, not because I was like a badass cold caller, but because I was a good copywriter. And
Yeah.
because I was very like personable when I got a warm lead on the phone, I like could book a meeting every single time. Cold calling, not my forte. However, just like that relational, conversational aspect, I was pretty good at. So when I took a look at my career and they were like, we want to promote you to an AE. And at the time, that prospect was like very, very transactional. That role would have been at that company. It's not that way everywhere, but like that role would have been like taking credit cards and passing people off to CS. And that just sounded soul crushing to me.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to do that. And I was talking to my manager and I was just like, well, like, I think I don't want to do that. And he was like, well, I would love for you to be a BDR manager. But we talked about it and he was like, yeah, like it's only like 8 or 9 months away. And I was like, I can't be a BDR for another 8 or 9 months. Like I will die. So I pretty quickly made the decision to like, he encouraged me, like, what do you hate? Write it all down. So I did. And then he was like, all right, what do you love? And what are you really good at? And I wrote it all down. And somewhere in the midst of all of that was like a very clear sign that I should move to marketing and like try and start more conversations with more people. And so I was very intentional about building a relationship with the VP of marketing and the hiring manager, like that I thought would be the most likely person to bring on a role.
Yeah.
Um, and I shadowed the person who was like most entry level in marketing. And I was like, I could do that job, I think. So like, let me shadow them because inevitably they're going to get promoted and I will get their job. Well, they ended up like 2 months after this process started putting in their 2 weeks. And the VP of marketing hit me up and was like, hey, I want you to apply for this job. I'm posting the rec tomorrow morning. I expect your application by 10 a.m. I was like, okay. So I like did it, applied. They made me go through the interview process. And I remember very distinctly, final round of the interview, the VP was like, so Zoe, I have a candidate who has 5 years of experience applying for this role. And then I have you. Why should I hire you over them? And like, I don't know if I had a stroke or like what went on in my brain, but within like a quarter of a second, I was like, I don't know that you should hire me. And then all of a sudden I like rolled the red carpet and I had to walk it. And I was like, yeah, like, I don't know if you should hire me. Like, if you want experience, I don't have that. I can't manifest 5 years of experience instantaneously. But if you want somebody who knows our customer, who knows our product, who spent countless hours on the phone, on Zoom, writing emails to these people, I know how to talk to these people. And I think
Crushed it.
that would be of value. And he told me when he hired me, he was like, that was the moment I knew, like when I said that. And I didn't prep that answer. That was like a fluke and it came to me in that moment. And I feel very grateful that I said that. But anyway.
You're like, I blacked out. What did I just say?
Literally. Well, and because of that answer, he changed the job description. So they hired me and then they brought me in and incorporated this whole community concept to my role that didn't exist when I was applying. I was supposed to like run social media. And then I ended up doing customer marketing and a little bit of community and running and like doing all of our customer webinars. And like, I got to try all this stuff and start to build a little bit of a customer community that didn't exist prior to me saying that in that interview. Like they literally made the job around me, which was super lucky. Yeah. BombBomb. And that was then ultimately how Dooley found me, because somebody at BombBomb left and became an advisor at Dooley. And when I was like, hey, like, I feel like I'm running into a wall here, I'm not so sure that this is like what I want to be doing, he was like, well, let me introduce you to Mark over at Dooley. And then Dooley came about and that was amazing. And then like, because of community, again, when I was like kind of not sure what I wanted to be doing next, Amy Volas came in with the intro to Spec It, and you know, now I'm at Spec It. So I think equal parts like community has been the path, and also like it's sort of revealed itself to me as much as I've just been kind of like walking in a direction.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. Like one of the things that comes out of that is, the power of networking, getting to know people in your space. I think there's like a lot of value to be had in that, regardless of whether or not you go from being a BDR into community. It's just helpful for being a BDR and trying to elevate your career. I'm curious, what have been some of the really helpful, what do you think has been helping you be successful in bridging those new relationships?
Yeah, so I think like, wait, sorry, are you talking about like when you go from like one role to another, like what bridging relationships?
Good question. I'm thinking more like, okay, you're trying to grow community or your network in this case. How are you going about, reaching out to people, building a connection, right? So like say, like getting to know Amy or getting to know like Scott. Like, how does that relationship start? I think a lot of people get stuck there and they get
so it's like relationship building. Okay, I got you. I think one thing that has really helped me is like not conversational intelligence like drift, but like emotional intelligence, conversational intelligence, like when you're actually having a conversation with somebody. So asking follow-up questions. Sam McKenna actually posted about this the other day about being interested instead of being interesting. And like, it's very
that was a post about meeting her now husband's friends for the first time.
Her friends. Like active listening. And what's so funny is like, I do this kind of instinctively, but after that post, I was like, you know what? I'm going to do this like very, very intentionally today, because I like when I'm tired, I'm not as good at active listening. Sorry, my dog wants to play fetch and I'm not going to play fetch. When I'm tired or like when I'm like burnt out, I'm not as good at active listening. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to like be really intentional about this. And I tried it in the car with my husband. And we had like the best conversation on the drive to the gym. Just because I was like, you know what? I'm like totally going to like dig in and ask more questions instead of being my like usual zombie self. So I think like it's just having that skill of being genuinely interested. There's this idea of inverse charisma that I heard on a podcast. Adam Grant was guesting on like Armchair Expert or something like that. And he was talking about like, you inevitably will seem more interesting to people and will build a stronger bond with someone if you can make them feel more interesting themselves. So like, I think when you have that active listening skill, I would describe Sam McKenna and Amy Volas as people who have that inverse charisma. Every time you talk to them, you feel more awesome about yourself because they're just like that good at asking questions. And like, that's something that I value as a person. Like, I want to make other people feel seen. I want to make other people feel like they're important. And so I think when you are intentional about asking questions, when you're actively listening, when you're, like having these dynamic discussions here, like, can I make the person on the other end seem more interesting or like feel really excited about what they're talking about? I think Nick Capozzi is also very, very good at that.
He kills it. He kills it. And plus, like, just his excitement as well to like give back. I felt like we sat down. He went and like tried to help me with some like my video presence, and he was like, "Yeah, you're good, but like here's like where you're kind of falling off." And I was like, "Huh?" And just like, yeah, he got like so excited after the fact.
What was one thing he told you that you feel like you've implemented and you're like, "Yep, that was perfect"?
Tone inflection. So, and like strategic pausing. So it all started because Scott invited me to come speak to his community. I gave like probably the most dry presentation on email writing of all time. And Nick's like, I get a note from Scott about it afterwards. He like calls me and he goes, "How do you feel about that?" I was like,
"Oh no."
Yeah. He's like, "I got some advice for you because I know you're gonna be doing more of this. Like, try to get better at doing this." And he was like, "Here's like the places." I was like, "Okay," I took that to heart, and so I reached out to some people who I thought were really good. Nick was one of them because I was like, "Dude, you crush video. How can I get better at it?" Scott just ripped me.
I think like that's so special though, and that speaks to the strength of your community as well though. Like not everybody would take the time to like give you that feedback in a way that is constructive or kind. They'd just be like, "Well, that sucked, never inviting him back," or like whatever, which I'm sure it didn't suck. I'm sure it was amazing. But like it's cool that you have a community that you can tap into for that, right? Like that's like the value of community, right? Like you can pull from these people who want to see you succeed, who are rooting for you. You're somebody who is easy to root for. I think that's like another piece of it too. It's like when you're building community, when you're building an audience, like being someone who's easy to root for makes it so much easier to build those things.
Yeah, and one of the things I was thinking of too with the the inverse charisma, that conversation aspect that you're talking about, where you're digging in and being so interested in the other person. One, it requires you to be really intentional about it. But two, I think of people like Amy Volas, who like they give you some of the harshest feedback that you've ever heard, but you need it. And it's so thoughtful and like you're so accepting to it because of it's coming from like a well-informed place because of how they converse with you. Right. Like
I also think this, and I have no idea if we're totally derailing this conversation, but I was thinking about this today. And I think about it when I think about my manager, Mandy. She's our VP of marketing. She's amazing. And I think about it with Amy. I think about it with like Christine Rogers, right? Clarity and like specificity in feedback that is also kind is like such a marker of experience and expertise. When I am asked like, "What do you think about this, Zoe?" And I'm like, "I don't like it, but I don't really know what's wrong." Like, it just shows you that I have no idea, like, I don't really know what I'm talking about, right? Like, just a feeling is not good enough feedback. And I used to have leaders who would say like, "This isn't very good, but I don't know what I would change." And it would drive me up a wall because I didn't feel like I could get any better. But when I talked to an Amy, when I talked to a Christine, when I talked to a Mandy, they're like, "I love that. Here's where I would work on it. I'm going to hold up a gentle mirror and show you like where I think you could improve. Like, what do you think about that?" And that it's like, it's specific, it's clear, it's kind. And it just kind of like reinforces for me their level of expertise. And like, I want to be that good at giving feedback.
And there's a couple ways we could take that too, because I think in prospecting, specificity is so crucial because it's this weird balancing act of I need to be hyper specific to a specific thing and the thing that we do to solve for that thing, because otherwise it just comes across as vague nonsense, right? Hey, can I fix your cost of customer acquisition? Right? It's like aloof in the world
You're
versus
like,
me.
cool, how, what? Like,
Yeah, I'm like, I'm not gonna respond to that.
yeah,
Versus like I saw this very specific thing, it makes me think this very specific thing. Thusly, I'm curious for dealing with this very specific thing. That is like, oh yes, that's very thoughtful. I think the other side of this is I was talking to Nick Thickett over at B2B Power Hour,
yeah.
um, and he was sharing it was like an academic study about this, like, I'm trying to remember what the term was. But basically, it's like this idea that we struggle with things that are innate to us, and like like struggle to externally communicate that.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Like community building might be like innately easy for you. And so like when somebody's like, well, what do you mean? You just like reach out to them, right? You're like, I don't want to just have a good conversation with them.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, it's hard for you to be like, well, you did a good job of it being like, well, you just ask them questions, be interested in them. Right. But like a lot of people would be like, yeah, it's just bad outreach. Like, why is it bad outreach? I don't
Right.
understand. It's ugly.
Okay, this is super interesting because there was a rep that reached out to me this week and she was like, "Can you create a spec on social selling?" And like a spec is just like a, like a battle card or something, like a piece of information, a bite-sized piece of information that we can serve up to our team. And they were like, wait, sorry, somebody just put in the chat. Adam Grant's Think Again. It's literally on my desk right now. I'm about to start reading it, so I'm very excited.
That's awesome.
But where was I going with that? I was talking about something. Rep reached out and she's like, "Oh, can you like write like a playbook for social selling and like DMing people? Like, how would I start a conversation?" And I had to actually like sit there and think about it. I was like, "Can you give me till the end of the week?" Like,
Yeah.
I know how to do this in a situation, like instinctively in a situation. If somebody said a thing, it would trigger something in my brain and I would go reach out. But like to actually quantify that on paper into a framework or a playbook for somebody else to take, which I think is like, that's the whole thing. That's the whole crux of it, is to like be able to do that, to actually train people and make people better, and something I want to improve upon. But I'd never really thought about it that specifically. And so I was like, I'm going to work on that this week and see if I can like break down what triggers I'm looking for. Because I know it when I see it, but like to be able to explain that to somebody else, make like, oh, you know it when you see it. Such useless advice to give to somebody. Like they're like, I don't know it when I see it.
It's on par with like, hey, just go add some value, and it'll work out.
Add some value, be specific, not vague. Have a good CTA. They're like, what's that? Like,
it's funny too, because I think about like the place where it's so easy to get tripped up on this is personalization. Because it's like, okay, I'm supposed to do it. I get 2x more replies. How do I do it? What does that mean?
Well, like personalization that actually means something. Like I was actually at a talk last night, and I never, ever would like interrupt or try and correct a speaker while they were talking. We were in like a small group and like they were asking for feedback, and I wasn't going to be like, I wholeheartedly disagree with your approach, sir. But like he was talking about, and it was coming from a good place, but he was talking about, like, do your research, like find out what college they went to and like bring it up in the conversation. I was like, if somebody brought up, I'm actually very embarrassed of the college that I graduated from. If somebody brought it up on a call and was like, "Go Flames," I'd be like, "Oh God, no!" Like I don't talk about it, right? And so
it's not genuine.
Like what?
It's not genuine, right? Like being like, "Go Flames!" Like I didn't go there.
Well, it's not. Yeah, it's not genuine, and it's also like some people don't care about that. Like I barely graduated college. I had a brain injury when I was trying to finish, and so like my GPA was like 2.6. They technically put me on academic suspension. Like I barely finished. And so I have no sense of like, oh, my alma mater, like alumni pride. However, Melanie, my CEO, went to CU. Like the Buffs have like a huge alumni network, and like people are really, really big into that. So like knowing when that lever is valid and when it's not, like it's too generalized. And so I think like people need to understand like the relevance part of personalization, because it could be personal and lack relevance entirely, and I don't care. It could also be incredibly impersonal, but if it happens to be very timely and relevant, I might still respond to it. If like you have a thing that I need at the time that I need it, whether you mention my college or not, I might reply to that email. So it's like really finding that balance of personalization will get you more opens and more replies, but can you also have the timeliness and the relevance to actually like book a meaningful meeting and close the business?
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because there was a couple months ago. I actually like went back to an old like I like cringed doing it. I went back to an old email and clicked the book me link, and I was like, I can't believe I'm doing this. I feel dirty.
Because it was a tool that you needed.
It was an awful email, and I was just like, damn it.
It's like, but it's the thing that I need, right? And like,
Yep.
so that's why like when people are like, like automation never works. I'm like, not never, not often. It's not the best way to do it, but I would be lying if I said I never responded to an automated email. Sometimes people get you at the right time, and it's like that's why striking that balance, why having tools like a Lavender to help you like with the volume of stuff like that, like you have. I think that's people's biggest problem is like creating that personalization and relevance. People are always like at scale. And it's like, well, if I'm left to my own devices to write a perfect email, I'm going to write like 4 of them in a day and be tapped because I don't have like the brain power to make something that's succinct and meaningful. And I think Lavender really helps me. Like, what's that quote that's like, oh, I would have written you a short letter if I had more time.
Yeah, it's Blaise Pascal, commonly misattributed to Mark Twain.
Yeah, I think somebody quoted it as Mark Twain when I heard it most recently.
It's Blaise Pascal, which is like a French physicist, and he wrote about it. But yeah, I think Mark Twain later used the same phrase. But yeah. Can you give an example of a relevant email you would respond to? So Ryan, it would be the example of a relevant email that I would respond to, right? Is let's see. Say we're hiring an engineer right now, right? It's like we are looking for an engineer, and you reach out and you say, hey, I've got this software that can, surface 10 highly qualified engineers. Like, it might be like the worst like automated spam mail of all time, but it's like a big problem that needs a solution. I'll be like, how does it work?
Yeah, you just want to learn more. And that's the goal of the email too, right? Like you're not necessarily I don't know very many people who've like sold on a cold email. I've never received a cold email been like, here's my credit card. Like that's not the way that it operates. But if you can just get that curiosity to start having that conversation, like that's the goal of the cold email.
Yeah.
And so I think,
And I think a lot about when you say that, I think about like my behavior when I get emails like that. Even if it's like irrelevant, what you're gonna get from me is just like a peppering of questions. It wasn't Mark Zuckerberg. It was Mark Cuban. I was like, it's a Mark guy, and he was talking about triaging his inbox. He's like responds to all these emails, right? And he talks about his process, and he's like, if it's interesting, I will just pepper the person with questions, and then I will delegate them to the next person that they need to go talk to. And I was like, that makes a lot of sense, right? Pepper them with questions, and you'll know pretty quickly whether or not like it's something worth like a deeper dive.
Totally. Yeah, I like that. I like that sort of litmus test. I think I'm pretty guilty of just stressing out about my inbox. I'm really guilty of stressing out about my LinkedIn inbox because it is a nightmare hellscape in there. Like not just of the DMs themselves, but like we all universally, don't get me wrong, LinkedIn gods, I love you, but we all know that the DMs are crazy and like so hard to navigate or sort or filter in any way. And I get in-mails and I get pitches and I get people who are actually trying to like build a relationship and I get like potential opportunities for Spec It. So I need to actually go through them, but I get so much anxiety. So if you ever build Lavender for LinkedIn, like specifically, we'll integrate. Yeah, you're right on that, on the roadmap. I love that.
Yeah, actually it's on the roadmap, not like a fake on the roadmap.
It's on the roadmap, but actually, that's the next T-shirt that SalesFeed needs to come out with.
Yeah, on the back. but actually.
Yeah, really, it's on the roadmap.
Oh man. Okay, so you mentioned the DMs. We do have some DMs. Before we do that, I want to talk a bit about community at Spec because I think it's unique to see a company embrace it as hard as they have. I'm curious, like internally, what was the conversation that you had with them? Like, how would you describe the atmosphere towards community building? And like, what is the goal of community building with Spec?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple different things. When they were like recruiting me pretty hard, I made like a little presentation of like, this is what I think the plan is. And the prompt was, tell us how you would build community in your first 6 months at Spec. Like, how would you build Spec's proprietary community? And my entire presentation was, I will not build a proprietary community in the first 6 months at Spec. And then I went into why. And I was like, there are so many other communities out there right now. We don't even know where the gaps are or where we could add additional value. We don't, community for community's sake is doomed to fail every single time.
Yeah.
So like you need to rally around like a problem or a persona or an anthem or a thing that people are passionate about. Like you have to have sort of like a core, like something that people can rally around. Like I like to think of it as, I don't know if you were cool in high school. I was not cool for my first 2 years of high school. I was very uncool. In fact,
I'm
I looked
still not cool, so
yeah, I mean, I don't know that I ever like technically got cool, but I was like, if you could picture me, but like 8 times the chubby cheeks. I made a horrible decision to have bangs at one point. I didn't know how to like fill in my eyebrows and had braces. So all of that going on for me.
You're crushing it.
Oh god, there's a photo out there in the ether that I've tried to destroy so many times, but it's just like, it's like my freshman year like yearbook photo. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So
good.
I remember distinctly the moment when somebody at the cool kids table like turned around and was like, hey Zoe, come sit with us. And like my life actually changed after that. Like in high school, like I went from being like so lonely and miserable to having like a really cool group of friends, all because somebody turned around and pulled up a chair for me. And so like my philosophy as a community builder is I want to be the person at the table pulling up extra chairs, making more room for more people, but also it being a place that people want to go spend their time. And so in order to do that, you have to know like what is going to draw people in, what's going to make them think like that's the cool kids table and I want to be in it. And then like, how can you be sort of like the rainmaker and like pull people into that? And so I kind of like pitched that. And I was like, either they are going to love this or they are going to hate this and be like, why did you just waste our time? This was not the prompt that we gave you. And they made me the offer that day. So it worked. And then that's what we did. We like jumped into other communities. I still spend time in other communities individually. And now we're just starting to build our own proprietary community. And we're actually going to start with that customer education piece. So we're talking about, and hopefully by the end of this quarter, which our quarter is off like the fiscal year or the calendar year, fiscal year is off the calendar year. Right. But our quarter, by the end of it, I would love to have an MVP of an actual customer community. Right now we have something called a marketing advisory council that I just stood up, and it's a split of customers and non-customers. The non-customers are a do not pitch, do not sell like agreement. Like we're not pursuing them, even though they are our ideal buyer persona at our ICP. And basically we bring them together. We hyped them up. I gave them nothing in return. They are not getting paid for this, but they come together, once or twice a quarter into these focus groups. And we just get to like have a captive audience of our ICP, and we test messaging and we tease product and we get just like a ton of really concentrated feedback. And that is going to kind of also inform where I build community, because these are the people that I want to serve. And I want to know what they want. It doesn't make sense for me, Zoe, to decide what an enablement community should look like when I have never been an enablement person. I know how to build community, but I don't know what an enablement person, I mean, I have ideas because I talk to a lot of them, but I don't sit in that seat. So I need the enablement people who sit in that seat to inform what they want. It would be insane for me to be like, I think they want this, and then like go build that and nobody cares. So that's the way we're approaching it. Melanie, our CEO, is very, very big proponent of community and like customer advocacy as being a really good channel. And I think right now in an economy where everybody's budget is like $7 in a paperclip, retention, expansion, making sure your customers are happy, elevating your customers, sharing their story and how they are like painting them as the true hero that they really are. Like that's a really, really valuable channel. And so I think like people are doubling down on community, even though it's hard and it's complicated and it's like sort of ambiguous, because they know that that's the key to like repeat success, as well as like really strengthening the customer base that you already have.
Yeah. And so when you think about community, there's a couple of things that sort of stand out from it's one, bringing a group of people who are within your ICP together to talk about problems that they're having. Is that, I guess that's a piece of it.
So for the marketing advisory council, that's what we did. It was more so like, can we test? I saw two problems. We needed an opportunity to feed our content funnel with industry experts and thought leadership. I wanted to tag Specket's name to voices that are already respected in the community of our ICP. So if our ICP is the audience, who is, the Michael Jordan of enablement? And I went and found those people.
Yeah.
And now they're like in a little group with me in a Slack, and I like hit them up and be like, what do you think about this? Would you want to do this content together? The other problem was we were having a hard time with our messaging. Our product is really, really, really freaking cool. And because there's nothing else on the market like it, it's very hard to describe to people. And so we were kind of running into a wall where it was like, unless people see it, they don't always get it. And so that's a problem because you don't always like get to show somebody the product in the first 2 minutes you're talking to them. And if you can't get their attention or talk about the problem in a very clear way, like that's a huge issue. So we now have 15 people who are our ideal buyer personas. Some of them use our product. Some of them have never, ever touched it. And we get to test our messaging on them and see how it hits, see how it lands. They're like, yeah, I don't understand what that means. Or like, okay, this pitch, you're talking about enablement, but like, you're not really talking about me and the problem that I have. We're like, oh, what is that? And so like, we learn a lot by just having conversations with these people and letting them actually talk to one another while we just listen. So they're almost having like healthy debate together of like, well, I'm not really having that problem. I'm having this one, or like my CRO says this, or like whatever. And so we get to listen to them discuss and like vent and taking notes. And then all of a sudden I have, 4 blog post ideas, and my head of PMM is like, I got more out of that 30-minute call than I did in the last like quarter of research or whatever. And like, that's like the huge value, which we will then turn around to provide to the community again. So it becomes this like reciprocal motion.
Yeah, I feel like some of our best product stuff comes from me just yanking our CTO onto customer calls and being like, just watch.
Okay, I was in a like meetup yesterday that Base threw together for customer marketing and customer advocacy and community marketers. And somebody brought up the idea of, what if you brought a customer to a team meeting? Like, what if you just like had 1 or 2 customers sit in on a team meeting, and then you ask them like, hey, we're thinking about doing this marketing campaign. Customer A, like, what do you think about that? And I was like, that is cool as hell. And I want to try that. Like,
I love that idea.
I can't take credit for it.
we talked about that for a minute internally, and they were like, what if like we can't, like, we thought about like literally live streaming internal conversations, and I was like, that's probably a little risky, but like the idea of inviting somebody was really interesting.
Yeah, like if you just invited like 2 or 3 customers at a time, almost like a cab, but like, more one-off or whatever, and then like bring different people in every time. Like our MAC is 15 people. I can't always get all 15 people on the quarterly call. So we have 2. And it's like, can you come to this one or can you come to that one? And then it's 7 and 7. And people get to talk.
Yeah, I think your approach to this it's really interesting. Which it reminds me a lot of what good founders do when it comes to building product and taking it to market. I see this mistake all the time. I was talking to a small team. It's like the first sales hire, and they think they basically have to go build the thing that scales day one, right? They need to like message and behave like a Series D company. And you're like, You don't
You're
even have
not.
a product yet. Like, you should be, like, more humble, a little bit more, like, arms out, like, "Hey, I'm just looking for feedback. We wanna make this thing into a thing, and we're not sure how to make that thing." Right?
Yeah.
Like, that approach works so much better, and I have to give that advice all the time.
I think like, yeah, there's something to be said for humility and just like being a person. You're not, like obviously you're the co-founder and COO of Lavender, but like when I'm talking to you, I'm talking to Will Allred. I'm not like, oh, I'm talking to the COO of Lavender, like which is like cool. And
Yeah.
someday, like you're gonna be somewhere a couple of years from now, and somebody's gonna be like, oh my God, it's Will Allred, the COO of Lavender, like it's gonna feel like that, like it gets to that point. But I think early days, building those relationships with people. And again, like being somebody who's easy to root for. It's easier to root for somebody who's not a jerk and like
Yeah.
doesn't have all this like ego behind them. I think ego is usually like a big indicator of insecurity for me.
Mhm.
And like I think that honestly puts me off more than anything else because I'm like, what are you compensating for? Like the fact that you're coming off so strong
Yeah.
in this way makes me think that it is the only place in your professional like world where you have a lot of confidence. And so it makes me wonder where the gaps are that you're like kind of trying to like veil. And that those are the people that I get nervous about working with or partnering with or offering help to versus
Mhm.
somebody who, like you said, it's just like, we don't know. Will you help? Like
Yeah.
when I used to ask people to mentor me, I would raise my hand and be like, I have literally nothing to offer you in return
Yeah.
except really good questions and like, I'll buy you coffee. Like, what do you say? And people always like love that
Yeah.
because I wasn't like, I'm gonna be the best mentee ever. I'm like, I'm literally an idiot. Like, will you please teach me everything that you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, and, like, if you're asking somebody to be, like, a mentee, right, like, I'm not even expecting anything in return. So it's funny to be like, "I'll be the best mentee you've ever had."
I'm gonna be the best mentee you've ever had. I'm like, probably not. Probably not even top 10.
Yeah.
Like
I'll probably, like, mess up a few times, and we'll have conversations about it.
you'll probably kick me out of your mentee program at some point, but like I really want to learn, I promise.
Yeah. But, yeah, it's interesting, like, we have data on our end that actually supports a lot of this topic
Mm,
here, which is, like, tonality data. This will be our transition into going through your DMs, which will be fun.
sweet.
So
Sad
what
I
we
didn't include the poem.
I know, I'm sad you didn't either. Because that sounded hilarious. That said, you still get, like, late night messages here, so we got something. We got something going. Okay, the where was I going? The data.
Tonality. You're talking
Um,
about tonality.
yes. So coming across as informative is
Hmm.
actually, like, directly negative correlated with, like, getting responses. So, like, the more informative you are, the less replies you're gonna be getting. But when you
Mm.
show up with this tentative tone, when you come across as unsure, people tend to reciprocate and reply at a really high rate. Um,
That's so interesting because think of all the sales leaders and coaches of our time that are like, be prescriptive. And it's
mhm,
like, I've always found that being curious has like landed me more conversations than being like, I know that you, sir, have this problem and we have this solution versus
yeah,
like, hey, some people I talk to have this problem. Am I way off here? Are you experiencing this? Like that
yeah,
usually lands better.
yeah, yeah, one of my favorite things to just pepper into messaging is, like, correct me if I've got it all wrong.
Oh yeah.
And just, like, sprinkle that in. People are like, "No, you didn't get it wrong, but I'm just busy."
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a friend, Keegan, who runs the business development and sales team over at SendLane, and he used to say, like, "Am I like I think this is what you need, but like if I'm way off, like you can just tell me to go kick rocks. Like it's fine.
Yeah,
Like.
yeah,
And he used to have this little like gif of him on a hike kicking a rock like off a cliff. And it was just like so funny, like that
mhm,
human, like humor, like it's okay. No harm, no foul. I used to say, if this is not a good fit, like let's part ways as friends. And just
yeah,
like keeping things very low pressure for people makes them more willing to like open up a little bit.
yeah. So the reason this transitions so well into your DMs is because the first message here is like, are you seeing that? The weird
Yeah, it's
flashing
like
on
a
the
little
screen?
flashy.
That's awful.
Well, it's
Um,
starting to go away.
yeah, okay, that was. Like if I put my mouse up here, does it go away?
Yeah.
All right. Well, if you have epilepsy, I'm very, very sorry. Uh, let's see. I'll try this format and then see if that fixes it. No. Okay. Let me do this and then try one more time. And if it doesn't fix, we'll just run with it. Okay.
Perfect. Looks great.
We are good now. Okay. So the informative tones in this message stood out like big time. So this middle paragraph here, I see so many sellers do this. So like first off, the hello, it's a little formal for me, whatever. This whole paragraph of here's some things to consider, right? On average, video marketing creates 66% more qualified leads, blah, 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 blah. You're just getting talked at versus like someone trying to have an engaging conversation with you, right? I'm curious, why did you pick this one though? Because like that one was like one of the key things that stood out to me. There's obvious like gaps, like I'm the blank of, this company.
Yeah. I think so there are a couple things that stood out to me of why I did not like this DM. One, I actually haven't even read the whole thing. So I screenshot it. I really I have not, because if you look at that giant middle paragraph, it just looks like a wall of text to me. And I'm a skimmer. Like people get upset about the line by line LinkedIn format because they're like, this is so dumb. Why do people do this? They get really upset about it. But it's for
because you won't read it otherwise.
People won't read it otherwise. I'm intimidated by this block of text. And when you space it out line by line or sentence by sentence for me, I know what I'm looking at. And also there's a bunch of research to suggest that your eyes on a page, and partly this is because of email culture, and part of it is because of the way we read from left to right. You start at the top left, you drop down to the bottom, and then you go to the middle. So anytime I'm reading an email in a very, very quick fashion, I'm looking at that first, the greeting and maybe the first sentence. I'm dropping down to the CTA. And I honestly, half the time I skip the middle part. So this one, I never even read that middle part. It was too big of a block of text. And that's why I picked it. Because I was like, I haven't even read this one. Let's dissect it.
Yeah, because I saw that and I was like, wow, we could literally just cut that entire thing and the message would be the exact same. Nothing was lost.
Yeah, what I talked about it this morning, it's write less and say more.
Yeah.
You don't need, if I can summarize that paragraph in one sentence, why did you write it in a paragraph anyway?
Yeah. Well, and that research, by the way, that you're talking about, it's interesting. It gives me some validity on why I'm such a big fan of sandwiching personalization. So a little personalization at the top, a little bit at the bottom. But it's extra valuable on LinkedIn because of the way it formats and shows to you, right? If I'm scrolling through LinkedIn, somebody throws me a random DM, I see the bottom of the message before I see the top of the message.
Yeah. Because of the way that was the other thing too. That was why I picked this one. This isn't even the full message. There's more. It's more it's more than one screen. I couldn't even fit it all. And that's the problem is it doesn't pass the scroll test. Same thing with that suggestion of an email should be one phone swipe. If it's more than one full window, when my giant 30-inch monitor cannot fit it in one shot, there's no way I'm reading that.
Yeah. I will say I was impressed that they got the little double dot up here. They got that in there.
I know. So I'm wondering what automation tool they used, or if they did use an automation tool, because 9 times out of 10, and part of the reason I include the double dot there is because it shows up as a capital A with a line over it almost anytime somebody uses automation.
Interesting. Yeah,
I don't know what it is.
I use the purple heart, and then people will just send me, hi, purple heart.
Stupid.
Which I'm like, okay, I immediately know. It's just
it's a good little litmus test.
Yeah. No, this is, well, I guess the question for you, Zoe, is, do you think Spec is using video marketing to the fullest?
I don't, but I don't want to respond to this person because they didn't really provide me any actual tangible value. And I never really kind of read any of their value prop.
Yeah. So it's too long. We got that. Yeah. And when I see something like this is all stuff you kind of already know, right? You might not know the numbers and they're not going to stick with you. if we're rewriting this, right? Like, where do you think you would start? I would start obviously with like personalized and observation, of course, like maybe bring up some videos that you've been using.
Yeah. I mean, well, first of all, like first line, I would not start with an I statement. It wouldn't be
Yeah.
like, I'm the CEO of blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't care who you are, guy. Like,
Yeah.
what?
I
Why
also
is
I
that
feel
relevant?
like let me cut to the chase.
Yeah, also, yeah, like, okay, you could have eliminated everything else. It could have just been, hey Zoe, great to connect. Let me cut to the chase. Do you think Spec is using video marketing to the fullest? That could have been the whole DM. I would have been 90% more likely to respond to it than this.
Yeah. Which the message below is a perfect example of a would have probably responded, right? Because this person asked you what? This person asked you a quick note about, hey, can I ask you a quick question? Right?
Yeah.
And which sure thing, right? You just treat it almost like a text message.
Yeah.
Just something like you got a response. Versus, I felt the need to send you this like behemoth of a note here.
I would also say, like, can I ask you a quick question works better in a DM or like sort of chat function than an email. Like, if somebody sent me, Zoe, can I ask you a quick question in email? I would never reply to that. But in LinkedIn, in a conversational, like back and forth, rapid fire, like real time chat situation, that's different. So I would just add that caveat of like, some things don't perfectly translate from DM to email, and I wouldn't recommend somebody just send an email with, can I ask you a question?
Yeah. And I think a big reason for that, right, is inbox is more of a to-do list. And like social is social. It's a water cooler. It's a always on conference kind of thing.
Yeah. It's a good place.
Yeah. Okay. We can leave this behind because we can
just move on. I don't even know what to do that.
All right. This conversation got me laughing because there's another piece to this. So the conversation starts. Can you ask a quick question? They got the reply, right? And then they just like fumbled. I've seen you recruiting, but I'm getting feedback from lots of companies saying they aren't getting the quality of applications they want or losing the good ones in the recruitment process. First of all, that is a monster of a sentence. That could have been broken up multiple different ways to make it easier to
The
read.
syntax is bananas too. I'm like, I've seen your recruiting, and I'm like, wait, those two things are like two completely separate. I don't really see how they tie together at all, actually.
Yeah. My rule of thumb with sentences is one sentence, one idea.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm like, I don't really like commas too much because they typically mean that you're converging two ideas. But okay, is this something you're seeing too? Like, am I seeing what? I guess, are you seeing not the quality of applications they want or losing good ones?
Like
two very different problems, by the way.
Yeah, two completely different problems. I also think you could eliminate I've seen your recruiting, and it would communicate the exact same thing. I also think.
Do you think they meant to say you are recruiting?
No, because later in the conversation they talk about like your recruiting process. So I think they were referencing like I've seen your. Oh, actually, you know what? It could be you are recruiting. That changes the meaning of the thing.
Yeah, right? Like, it's a simple typo that just like hose the entire sentence.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not totally sure. But the other thing that I would say about this is what would have taken it like the extra mile for me and maybe made me more interested is one, I'm not a recruiter. I'm in community marketing.
Yes.
But let's say I was a recruiter. I think I see lots of companies saying like, if she had like import something about like my title, like I see lots of, sales recruiters or lots of talent recruit. Like if she made it more about like my role as opposed to, or like me as a person, like that relevancy piece. It doesn't necessarily have to be hyper personalized, but just like lots of companies, like that's so vague versus like a lot of Series A startups, a lot of, something just like slightly more specific that is more relevant to my situation versus like companies in general. Like, are you talking about Oracle? Are you talking about like, cause that doesn't apply to me. Like, are you talking about like what industry? It's too vague.
Well, and back to specificity, right? they could have easily just said like, hey, I saw your posting about Spec recruiting, period, instead of this monster sentence. Yeah. Given your reach, is that designed to help, you get more diverse candidates or get, candidates outside your existing pools? Usually when I'm talking to companies at your stage, that's something that they're struggling with. Is that something you're seeing too? Like,
Yes.
just so much more specific than I'm getting feedback from lots of companies.
Totally. Well, and even though I'm not the person who is in charge of recruiting, that still is more relevant to me. And I'd be like, hey, yeah, like we are having a hard time, with like a lot of applicants, but not the right applicants. Like, would love to I'm somebody at a company who, like, if you reach out to me with really good outreach, but I'm not the right decision maker, I will make an intro to the right decision maker right away. Like, I have no problems doing that. Especially if it's a problem that I actually think we have. Now, once it's out of my hands, it's out of my hands. Like, if they decide that they don't want that, that is what it is. But like, this was basically approaching me as if I was a recruiter at Spec, and I'm not. Like, I don't have any say in those things.
Yeah. Also, I think this might have been the latest in the morning DM you got within the series.
Oh my goodness. Also, I am 5 minutes late to my meeting. I just realized we're over that.
All good. Tell Melanie hi.
I will. Thank you so much. Bye.
Appreciate you.
Appreciate you. Thanks all.
Thanks, y'all.